All right, hey everybody. I wanted to go over some simple posing here before we get started with the critiques. So I hope you watch this before you see your critique. So I'm going to go over this. And you can see here how there's some decent stuff going on here, but there's a lot of things that you can kind of um, add to make this stronger. Like the first thing I would say is let's fully pose the character, which means fingers, right? The pole vectors, the wrist shouldn't look broken, and find those natural kind of like balances and twists and rhythm in the form. So if the guy's going to be looking over here, right, he's not going to turn his cog and tilt it over for him to look in that direction. He would tilt his body and his head and neck, right? You're leaning on your center of gravity, but this is your base. If you whip it around or if you lean it in these extreme positions, we don't actually do that. You know, it's like if we're going to turn to the right to look, we don't do this, right? We don't turn like this. We use the spine and the head, right? So that being said, let's get started. I'm going to kind of go over this pose real quick and show you what I mean. So me just looking at this, I would use this guy here, and I would pose those hips, right? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move these away from the hips because they're not really doing anything. They're not posed. They're just kind of stuck on. The hands aren't posed or anything. So I'll take this and zero it out. Okay, so now he's level, right? So I don't need to move the cog into pose in order to pose his spine, right? So I'll look at his foundation. He's leaning on his left leg. Well, how do I strengthen this pose and show the audience that he's got weight on this leg, right? So I'd shift him a little bit this way, and then I'd use this control to tilt his hips a little bit, right? Which means now you can see it's locking the leg out. So I'll drop his center of gravity down, something like that, right? So now, why would I do it that way? Well, if I turn the cog, what happens when I turn the cog? Everything above, oops, that's not the cog. When I turn the cog, everything above the character is affected. So then if I did tilt the cog, I have to go back and counter the spine. If I use the hip rotation, it's independent from the cog, so I can do any swiveling I want, like side to side, like that kind of stuff. I would just use this, so I don't have to counter animate the spine, right? So if he's leaning really far forward, I can curve the hips in or back and kind of add to that curve of the spine, right? So, all right, so we have a nice kind of a little bit of weight on that leg, so like that. And then I'm going to zero these guys out. We don't translate the spine. See how there's keys here? You just leave it, just use rotations. Don't translate the spine. Okay, boom. All right. So now I can fix the kind of mispose that was going on there. So like that. I'm going to put a little more lean on those hips. Like that. Okay, and I know he's turning to look over here, right? So how can I add something to lead the eye this way? So I'm going to rotate his foot a little bit that way. Make sure the pole vector is over the toe, right? The knee should be in line with the foot. So I'm going to tilt that hip a little bit more, like that. Okay, so now I'm going to pose the spine, and he's looking this way, so there's going to be some turn in that spine. I grab both of them, turn them a little bit this way, a little bit that way, and then I'm going to build. I want him to curve, right? That doesn't mean do this, right? What it means is I'm going to take this, rotate him back a little, and then take this and rotate it forward, which is what we do. You're actually compressing, right? We're not just rotating. We don't wag. That's what I call, this is like wagging a tail, like a dog wags, right? It does this. We don't move like that. They move together, right? So this spine goes back, well this spine goes forward, the lower spine versus the upper spine to create that curve, right? So I'll just zero this out too. Okay, so then I would look at where he's looking, which is over here, right? So I'm going to put a little turn here, a little turn there. I pose both of them together, not just one. So you never isolate things. You always pose everything because they work together, right? The head and the neck, they work together with the spine. So they should flow. So if you look at the curve of the spine, it should flow into the head. If you get poses that look like this, then there's something wrong because the spine's doing the opposite. Okay, so I would have the head tilting a little bit more this way. Now, and I'm going to place those hands on his hips, right? So if this hand is gripping his hip, like this, right? If I'm going to grip that hip, I'm going to build a hand pose, right? It doesn't have to look exactly like the reference. In fact, the reference is exactly that, it's reference. So you can do something better than the reference. So I'm going to take that hand, and there's a couple different controls. You can grab this yellow dude, right? I'm going to zero those out. Start from scratch. So I can take the middle, index, middle, ring, pinky, kind of rotate them, right? Then go to like this. Got these two, and then the final one, right? So now they're kind of offset. I don't like these fork fingers. See how they're all separated? So I want to design my hand pose so they're together. So I'm going to bring this one and this one a little bit so they're more together. I'm going to bring this one in, bring this one in, so the hand doesn't feel like it's so spread apart, right? The thumb is going to wrap around the hip. I'm going to pose it in a second. Now I have kind of a generic hand pose, a base one. I can start from there. I'm going to place it on the hip. I want it to feel like it's on that hip. So it's actually probably going to wrap around. Over there. I'm going to place it here. Get it in where I want it. I want that hand to be wrapping around his hip. So something like this. Okay, so now we kind of have it in the general position. Now I'll work on getting the hand actually on the hip. So it looks like it's resting there. So I'll do that. You don't give up. You don't just kind of go, it looks pretty good. You keep finagling it until you get it to do what you want. Let's change that. So I'm going to change my tool setting here. I'm going to send this to world. A little easier to deal with here. Okay, so now the hand is on the hip. Now I'm going to pose those fingers so it feels like it's there. Okay, so I'm going to go in. I'm not going to rely on some generic pose either. I'm going to give it some character. So he's got a little bit of a grip on there, right? So I might turn it a little bit like this, like it's being pulled on because there's weight pushing down on it, right? I'll do the same thing with this finger. Bring it out a bit. So now it feels like it's kind of resting on that waist there. His waist, I should say, or her waist. I want it to be sitting right there on it. Okay, and then the pinky. I can do something interesting with the pinky. I don't have to have it just generic like this. I can have it open up. See how I have the two fingers together? It's not a bad design. But I'm going to bring them up so they're kind of leaning up more towards the index. Oops. Let me shift select this guy. One. Like that. Okay. And then this one, I'm going to crinkle that finger up. Something like that. Okay, bring this down. So it's sitting right there, something like that. Something you might do if you have your hand resting on your hip. Right, so I might take this and kind of give it a little more space there so that pinky isn't, digging into them. Turn that like that, drop it down. Then reposition this to work with the other finger. Counter that. So I'm just kind of I'm crafting the pose. I'm not just like kind of putting it in the general area and then moving on. Don't do that. Pose everything. Build your poses. You're going to change things eventually later on as you go. You're going to go, oh, I want to have less of this, or I need to move this now because I changed this. That's how it goes. But don't like put in some half pose where it's not finished. Okay, so now that elbow needs to flow, look comfortable, right? So if the hand is resting on the hip like that, right? The shoulder is in play, right? So don't translate the shoulders. When you translate the shoulders, you're moving the shoulder away from the clavicle, right? So as soon as you do this, dislocate it, right? It has a pivot point, right? So the pivot point is where the clavicle would be, where the sternum connects to the collarbone. So it would be something more like this, like that. So rotate it. That's how it works. You know, if you move your arm, you'll notice that you can't move your shoulder, you can't translate it away from your body. Okay, and then this hand, I'll do the same thing. I'm going to pose over there, like this. And I don't, since the hips are tilted now, they're not really mirroring. I don't want to make them look exactly the same, right? So I'll take this hand, kind of put it over there. I keep going back and forth until I get what I want, right? So I don't like this. They look like they're exactly the same. So I want one to be, doing something a little different. So this has got more weight on it, resting down here. So I'll kind of change that angle. Like that. Look at that wrist. Looks broken, right? So we don't want it to feel broken. So we're going to have that shoulder kind of roll back to kind of give it a little leeway so it's not going to be pinching that wrist so much. That pull vector, you don't want them way out in outer space. You want them kind of close up so you can control them. Some people like them way out there. I don't know why. I like it close up so I can have more control. Okay, so now the fingers are kind of gripping the hip here, so I'm going to grab them and put some twist on them. Right, it's like the fingertips are holding on so they're getting grip. Keep that hand in its position. So open up that wrist. Oh, I need to move it back a little. Let's put it back here. There we go. Now it's on there. So now I need to counter some of this stuff to kind of get it to work. So pick that up a little bit. When you're posing stuff like this is the fun stuff. This is where you get to design everything. Right? If you don't do all this work in the beginning, then you can't really move forward with animation because you don't have any poses to work off of. So that means it's not really animated. You just have it moving around like a mannequin. If you have a full pose, hopefully we will in a second, it looks better. It just feels more believable, it feels more interesting. So I'm going to curl this finger up just to make it interesting for me. So I'm going to grab that guy. This one. Kind of like what I did with the pinky over there. Put it down over there. Something like this. And we'll bring it in so it's kind of resting against that. And maybe we'll bring this up. Just to make it a little interesting. Okay? So now we have that. Now the shoulder kind of sweeps back a little bit because the arm is back, right? The hand is on that shoulder. We don't want to pinch this wrist, so that means the elbow would probably be somewhere like that, right? We don't want to like hurt the guy. So now we have a pose, right? It's not finished, not perfect, but it's getting there. So now we look at the curve of the spine, and since he's leaning forward over here, he's actually probably going to be, his weight would be a little further back. Because when we move forward, when we lean our torso forward, it's heavy. We have to counter that weight. So we need to move our weight back a little bit. So I might shift him back just a little. Just like that. Good. And then get that spine working again. Kind of counter him. So I want him looking down in the back, and then I'll bring that torso forward. So we get a nice curve to the spine. something like that. Okay, so if we turn this off, now we have a nice fluid pose. See that? See the tilts? So we got, actually, you know what? We should put some twist in here too. I don't need it, but I can add a little twist here. Helps lead the eye. I'll counter that neck back so it's not, his head's not looking kind of way off now. If you look at it in the camera view, nice angle, right? See that? Nice and fluid. You really feel that weight on the leg. Okay? The last thing I'll do looking at this is I probably would rotate this foot out so then it leads right up to the body, right up to the face. Right? And the knee doesn't have to be directly over the toe here on this pose because all the weight is on this leg. It can kind of droop a little bit. Okay? So let's look at it. Everything else. All right, that's it.